Hello everyone, Alien Theory here, wishing you a happy holiday season. I hope you had a good Christmas and a safe one. I hope that if your friends and family peg you as an Alien fan, that maybe you got some Alien-related presents this year. That's always nice. I also hope for a happy new year, and that going into 2021 we can begin to get closer to a sense of normalcy that perhaps we had been previously taking for granted. But today's video, which will be my last video of 2020, is not about looking forward, rather we're going to be taking a trip into the past, back to around this time in 1979, the year of Alien. The film became a huge hit of the summer, and had quickly been developing a very strong and a very curious fan base. If you were a fan back in 1979 and wanted to consume as much knowledge about the film as possible, it was definitely a little trickier to do so. It's not like you could grab your DVD and watch some special features about the making of the film, and it's certainly not like you could hop onto YouTube and binge theory videos in the hopes of answering all your burning questions. There were of course no DVDs back then, no internet, so probably your best bet would be to find a special interest magazine that covered the topics which interested you. One of the earliest and best references for all things Alien came in December of 1979 in the form of Warren's Alien magazine. This was the officially authorized magazine of the movie, as it proudly boasts, and offered a wealth of insight for the newly growing fan base. It included sensational new pictures, information on scenes cut from the film, a look at the chestburster in color, and special effects photos. Plus, the first report on Alien 2, a mere 6.5 years away at this point. And this was all for the economical price of $2. What more could a fan ask for? I like to think that this magazine found its way under the tree of countless Alien fans during the Christmas of 1979, where enthusiasts of the film could relax after all the feasts and celebrations were coming to a calm and finally had a chance to open this puppy up and indulge in the world of Alien. So hopefully this video will somewhat recreate that experience and take a look at what the magazine had to offer. There's quite a bit to it, a lot of the making of the film, some behind-the-scenes secrets, interviews, and even some musings on the biological nature of the alien itself. This video is sure to be a long one, so I won't be going through all of it, but there definitely are some articles I want to highlight. You'll see what's within the magazine, but also for the sake of best painting a picture of the descriptions within, you'll also be seeing clips from the film and behind-the-scenes footage and images that were not included in this magazine. Aside from the front and back covers and the reverse sides, the magazine is in black and white, and not the highest clarity one living in 2020 may be used to. But to its credit, it immediately makes good on the promise of showing the chestburster in color once you open it up. Here the magazine describes the ghastly image. His breath comes in gasps. His muscles knot. His face contorts with agony, as the quiet, inquisitive Kane gives birth to a monster. Kane's crewmates stand by helplessly, above, as in one heart-wrenching moment, the alien explodes from his chest. The magazine is published by James Warren, and most of the writing you'll see here is from editor Jeff Rovin and senior writer Richard Myers. As the magazine begins, we get a look at the cast and crew who made the beloved film possible. It's very interesting to see the breakdowns of their careers considering how much followed, especially Sigourney Weaver, who made her debut with Alien. Here it describes Ripley. Alien was Sigourney Weaver's first foray into film acting, but it was not the beginning of her acting career. Having attended the Yale Drama School in Connecticut, she found parts in notable plays such as Marco Polo Sings a Solo, Gemini, and many of Joseph Papp's productions at his public theater. Throughout her off-Broadway career, she has been plagued by confusion. Even her acceptance letter to the Yale Drama School was addressed to Mr. Sigourney Weaver. She thinks her unusual first name comes from a Slavic word for gypsy. Now that stardom beckons with her role in Alien, few people will be at a loss to recall Sigourney Weaver. The description of the alien is a cheeky one. Not acknowledging any of the actors beneath the suit, the late great Blahe Badejo is not credited here, but rather it references the alien as if it's basically real. It's kind of amusing. The Alien. Born full-blown and terrible in the studios of Dan O'Bannon, Ron Cobb, Ridley Scott, H.R. Giger, and 20th Century Fox, this classic monster, although a novice in the movie business, expects a long, full life scaring other people to death. Standing at a furious 7 feet 2 inches tall, the alien has the power and charisma necessary to ensure attention in whatever project it contributes to. It attributes at least part of its on-screen ability to the time spent with technician Carlo Rambaldi. In this, its first full-length starring role, the alien is also quick to praise its fellow thespians, without whom it would have nothing to kill. But, judging by the world's response, the studio is planning to supply it with victims for many movies to come. Dallas. Tom Skerritt began his acting career because he professed to being shy. Acting was originally a kind of therapy, he says. That shyness has developed into a tight acting ability that projects a quiet confidence. Producer Terry Saunders saw one of Skerritt's early stock productions and cast him in a film called War Hunt. There still weren't many easy pickings, but he worked on Those Callaways, The Devil's Rain, Wild Rovers, Fuzz, MASH, and The Turning Point. In Ice Castles, he played Lynn Holly Johnson's somewhat repressed but still caring father. These recent roles offer a counterpoint to the quiet, doomed Dallas we all know in Alien. Kane. John Hurt has been stunning American and English audiences for the last 15 years with top-notch performances. The 39-year-old executive of the Nostromo elicited a pained compassion in one of his most demanding roles to date. Educated at London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, he has played a variety of roles. Included in his impressively diverse credits are The Ghoul, Spectre, Academy Award winner A Man for All Seasons, and lately he has been piling on one award-winning performance on top of another. As Quentin Crisp in The Naked Civil Servant, as Caligula in I, Claudius on PBS, and an Oscar nomination for Midnight Express. Brett. Harry Dean Stanton felt as if he had walked into the part of Brett because he sees Brett as an extension of myself. I usually don't separate the character I portray from myself too much. Luckily for him, there's a great demand for the tough-looking, laconical man he is. This personality has been perfect for such favorite American TV shows and films as Gunsmoke, The Walter Winchell File, Proud Rebel, Day of the Evil Gun, and such recent films as Straight Time, Cool Hand Luke, The Missouri Brius, and Kelly's Heroes. Never one to sit on his hands, Stanton eagerly awaits the reaction to his latest cinematic venture in Alien. He is sure to be well received here too. Parker. 40-year-old Yaphet Kotto plays the most direct and purposeful member of the Nostromo's crew. His performance is subtle yet powerful, a sly and masterful acting job that Mr. Kotto perfected during his fiery acting career. His career got off to a suitable start with his portrayal of Othello in Massachusetts. It was a great experience, and soon he was a theatrical regular. His first screen role was Nothing But a Man. He then wowed Broadway in The Zulu and the Zeta and promptly went on to The Thomas Crown Affair. Then it was back to Broadway to star in The Great White Hope and on to Across 110th Street, The Raid on Entebbe, and Alien. Ash. Although Ian Holm may not be recognizable as one of the luminaries of the British acting establishment, his 20-year career is studded with remarkable achievements. For many years he was at Stratford-on-Avon Shakespeare Theatre, where he turned in many remarkable performances in Richard III, Midsummer Night's Dream, and King Lear. In 1964 he won England's Best Actor Award, and in 1967 he won Broadway's Tony Award. Since he began doing films in 1968, he has been cast in Young Winston, Jesus of Nazareth, Juggernaut, and Holocaust. Of Alien, Holmes says that Ash tends to lose his head in an emergency. I flatter myself that I'll be able to keep mine. Lambert. With her blonde hair, freckles, and freshly scrubbed good looks, English-born Veronica Cartwright is the very image of the California girl. She began working in front of the camera almost as soon as she arrived on the West Coast at 6 as the Kellogg Girl for the company's cereals. This was quickly followed by In Love and War at the age of 9 and The Children's Hour at 12. At 14, she won her first Best Actress Emmy for Tell Me Not in Mournful Numbers. Between these performances, she had parts in Spencer's Mountain, The Birds, Inserts, Going South, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers. In Alien, she's rocketed higher with her superb performance. The co-producers. Rarely has a frightening film like Alien had such a wealth of experience behind it. Alien, in its final form, is a ride into extraterrestrial terror, yet the production team has had its greatest experience in comedy, pathos, westerns, and mysteries. Although 3 people produced the film, not one had any major experience with horror or sci-fi, but all 3 had a vision of quality that shone through every frame of celluloid. David Giler. This producer, writer, director started his life firmly rooted in the movie business, but it took an illness to start his career. Although his father was the noted screenwriter Bernie Giler, it wasn't until the young Giler lay idle in a sickbed that the writing bug bit him. To pass the time, Giler wrote the first version of what was to become the TV series The Gallant Men. Giler found jobs forthcoming even when he was well, and the future held for him a lucrative career working up scripts for television series like Burke's Law, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and The Kraft Theater. After several years, motion picture writing attracted him, and his entry into that form was an auspicious one. Giler wound up with co-author credit on the screenplay for the much-panned film project Myra Breckinridge, starring Raquel Welch and Rex Reed. Bouncing back from that disaster, Giler penned The Parallax View, starring Warren Beatty, and Fun with Dick and Jane, starring George Segal and Jane Fonda. He garnered further production experience by both writing and directing a Maltese Falcon sequel/satire called The Black Bird. Now, after successfully co-helming Alien, David Giler foresees a future filled with film hits. Gordon Carroll. Mr. Carroll has embarked and succeeded in enough careers to fill 3 men's lives. After graduating from Princeton, Carroll started at the very pinnacle of New York's theater world as a ghostwriter for Billy Rose's widely syndicated newspaper column. He followed this with some joke writing for the popular radio wit Abe Burrows. In World War II, on a personal commission from President Truman, Carroll started work in psychological and political warfare. After 3 years at the Pentagon, the comedy/warfare specialist head for the wilds of the New York advertising business. Following a 7-year stint, Carroll headed for Hollywood, where he teamed up with Elliot and Kenneth Hyman. Soon that trio partnered with Ray Stark to create 7 Arts. From that point on, things just kept getting busier. He was executive producer on How to Murder Your Wife, starring Jack Lemmon, later forming a production company with the actor to make The April Fools. Graduating to full production chores, Carroll's first film was Cool Hand Luke, starring Paul Newman. An able supporting player in that movie was Harry Dean Stanton, who would meet Carroll again on the set of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Walter Hill. Although Hill began a career in the construction and oil business, he didn't hit pay dirt until he got a reputation in Hollywood for strikingly visual screenplays. Born in California and educated in Mexico City, he started penning his stark, fast-moving movies in the early 70s, working up a script especially tailored for the popular team of Robert Culp and Bill Cosby. The outcome of that collaboration was Hickey and Boggs, a detective drama that was met with some cult interest. Following that was more of the same, with Hill's tightly drawn scripts for The Getaway, starring Steve McQueen, and The Macintosh Man, starring Paul Newman. Both were fast-paced action films, and both were helmed by top Hollywood directors, but it wasn't until Hill began directing his own films that he really started garnering critical attention. After writing The Thief Who Came to Dinner and The Drowning Pool, Hill signed and directed Charles Bronson and James Coburn to star in Hard Times, a fight saga set in the Depression. Hot on the heels came The Driver, starring Ryan O'Neal, which proved to be a popular hit overseas. Just prior to Alien, Hill helmed the controversial The Warriors, a film destined to make Hill a much-talked-about movie maker. The Director. Ridley Scott had 2 rabid writers, 3 eager producers, and 4 famous comic strip designers, and 4 sound stages of Alien to deal with. But somehow he managed to take all these components and shape them into the huge international cinematic success it now is. This did not happen by luck or accident. After decades of experience, Scott, with only 2 films to his credit, has begun to secure a reputation in the movie business second only to Stanley Kubrick. Working with Ridley, says production designer Michael Seymour, is a remarkable and stimulating experience. His involvement and interest extends to everything. I found him quite the most impressive director I've ever been involved with. Scott, with his usual honesty, credits the success he's had to the people who work with him. It takes an army of dedicated people to make a feature, he stresses. And on Alien, we had a marvelous army. Scott began to find recruits for his army after graduating from the Royal College of Art and enrolling in film school. He soon joined the British Broadcasting Company, first serving as set designer and working his way up to the director's seat. After a few years of helming various BBC series, Scott moved into the commercial areas, filming over 3,000 ads within a decade. Because of his talent and reputation, Scott was able to make The Duelists, his first feature film, and a striking exercise in cinematic style. The incredible response that movie elicited from critics and fellow filmmakers secured him his job on Alien. Both Yaphet Kotto and Harry Dean Stanton, friends in real life, agreed about the impact Scott's first film had on them. "It's one of the most exciting movies I've ever seen," said Stanton. "I saw it 3 times, said Kotto. "His pictorial images stay in the mind for a long, long time." All of Scott's ability, knowledge, and genius went into Alien, and it paid off. The writers. Both friends, both nonconformist young men who struggled to get their vision made into a film, the writers of Alien were lovers of the sci-fi form, and its horror subgenre particularly. While the production team may have known more about money than monsters, the screenwriters really knew how to strut their supernatural stuff. Ronald Shusett. Not only did Shusett help create the original story, he served as executive producer on the shocking space saga. From the beginning, he seemed to have what it takes to succeed: determination and drive. At the age of 28, Shusett was already producing plays at Los Angeles' Las Palmas Theater. While mounting popular productions there and on tour, he also attempted to sell his own manuscripts. But it wasn't until Dan O'Bannon hit the scene that they came up with a properly electrifying epic. Dan O'Bannon. He first came into the public's attention with the bona fide cult favorite Dark Star. This sci-fi satire started as a USC film school project. O'Bannon wound up co-writing, co-directing, designing, editing, and starring in the fanciful film that went through $100,000. His career was slow and maturing, and he was hopeful that a French-based production of Frank Herbert's Dune would be his ticket to stardom. But that project's failure was the start of Alien. There's a good account of the making of the film, a concise but very detailed write-up from its early script stages to the hectic shooting schedule with Alien history. The beginning. Genesis. Birth. It all began on a couch. The concept that was to become Alien first occurred almost 5 years ago when writer Dan O'Bannon returned from Paris after the collapse of the Dune film project. He was tired, broke, depressed, homeless. He spent 1 solid week motionless on Ronald Shusett's sofa before the need to create assailed him again. Desperate for work, O'Bannon searched the files of his mind to rediscover his lost creative spark. What he found was a half-finished script called Memory, which became the first half of what Alien is now. Uniting the memory concept with the unforgettable images of H.R. Giger's Dune work, O'Bannon put the finishing touches on a script titled Starbeast. Starbeast? Artist Ron Cobb, one of the men who was to design Alien, remembers what O'Bannon's original script was all about. There was a small ship with a small crew. They land on a small planet. They find a small pyramid and shake up a medium-sized creature. That's about it. But that was not to be it, not by a long shot. Late one dark and stormy night, Dan O'Bannon had a one-word brainstorm. With a bolt of mental lightning, the title struck him. Short, though anything but sweet. Alien. And with that, in O'Bannon's words, it just sort of exploded in all directions. The production team, called Brandywine Productions, Gordon Carroll, Walter Hill, and David Giler, bought the script. Giler and Hill reworked it. Ideas were suggested, adopted, or discarded. O'Bannon did a final rewrite of Alien and was ready to go. There were only a couple of things the team still needed, like a director, a crew, and actors. But that's where Ridley Scott came in. When I was offered the film, the director remembers, I went to Hollywood to discuss changes and budgets. The proposed budget was $4.5 million, which was impossibly low for that particular movie. In London, we had been doing a cost breakdown of the script and had estimated the budget at about $13 million, which was too much for 20th Century Fox. Naturally, there were some changes to be made. Ridley and his initial crew, cinematographer Derek Van Lint and production designer Michael Seymour, sat down to give the script one final workover, trying to trim scenes and thus trim the budget. They accomplished this through storyboarding, that is, drawing out every scene of the entire film on an endless series of 4-inch boards. And once they finished the overall concept, the trio went to work on the day-by-day shooting. One thing was for sure, if the movie had never been made, they could have published one heck of a comic book. Thankfully for the studio, the film was able to go forward at a new budget of $8.5 million, but there were times, more than one, when Ridley Scott almost wished it hadn't. The Fox people were fully convinced that they were going to run the film in theaters on May 25th, 1979, so at whatever cost, we had to get it out, says the director. There was no let-up whatsoever. Thankfully, there was more method than madness to the studio's decree. May 25th, 1979 was 2 years to the day that their previous sci-fi extravaganza Star Wars had premiered, the space opera to end all space operas. The only problem with Alien was it was not a fanciful excursion into the realm of space days and space nights. It was a calculated exercise in pure visual and visceral terror. Perhaps the studio executives thought that magic date would cause a little luck to rub off on Ridley Scott's saga. But all the director and his team knew is that the wrap day pushed up their starting day by a ridiculous degree. The producing trio had only 4 months to plan their monumental project. Mr. Seymour and Mr. Vanland remember those first hazy, crazy, anything-but-lazy days of filming. "The sets weren't even finished when we started to shoot," the cinematographer exclaims. "I had time to do little more than test equipment." While the photographer might have preferred more time, the designer totally enjoyed the rushed excitement. "It was an organic growth," he says. "We began with one set of ideas and let it grow into others. It was a constantly evolving thing. I mean, if we were still shooting, we would have evolved even further. What a thrilling way to work." It certainly was thrilling much the same way skydiving and mountain climbing are exciting. But one slip, and it could be curtains. In fact, at first, things seemed severely bleak for the movie makers. "It started to look as though we were shooting a television show," Ridley Scott sadly recollects. "Both Derek and I were unhappy that we weren't getting what we wanted visually, so we started throwing away the niceties of the set. The two men began to film by the seat of their pants, sometimes literally. Often the shots they designed called for the camera operator to race about the set with a handheld camera. One wrong step and the poor technician wound up flat on his back. Still, immediate satisfaction was not forthcoming. The schedule was so tight, the special effects were so sweeping, and Scott's search for perfection was so demanding that eventually the inevitable happened. The schedule was forced to slow down. There's no sense in shooting to stay on schedule, says Scott flatly. You've got to see it through the viewfinder, and if it's not there, there's no way to get it. That quite frequently can become a nightmare. Feature making can become a love-hate process. The love continued as the film began to take shape, but the hate still seeped in since the pace was still so hectic and not one person behind the camera had a chance to catch their breath during the breakneck shooting schedule. This pace was not lessened by the fact that the live-action photography was done at England's Shepperton studio while the editing and special effects were being filmed at distant Bray. I was editing while still shooting, Scott recalls. And the process of filming miniatures carried on right up to the last minute. You do it, and it's not quite right, so you do it again. And maybe again. But eventually there comes a point where you have to be practical and say, that's good enough. However, nothing was good enough for the film's star, the incredible alien. If that didn't look convincing, nothing could save the film. So, the greatest artists in the world were called to paint him. The greatest artisans in the world were assigned to build him. And the worst scares of the world were recalled to create him. He was to become the mightiest monster the cinema of the 70s had to offer. He could tear R2-D2 from bolt to screw. He could make Play-Doh out of the Close Encounters extraterrestrial. But what form was this ultimate alien to take? We saw what had been done before, Scott grimaces, where you get the old blob crawling across the floor or a dinosaur with claws, bumps, and warts. I said, oh God, it can't be that. As anyone who has witnessed the creature's mechanisms can confess, the alien was anything but that. The Fiend as finally filmed was the sum total of several artists' great work. First and foremost, there was H.R. Giger, who conceptualized and sculpted the vicious entity. But beyond that master craftsman, there were other draftsmen without whom the production wouldn't have had half of its tremendous visual impact. There was Chris Foss, a genius who constructed magnificent spaceships on canvas. Ron Cobb, a man of 1,000 designs, who wound up designing most of the Nostromo. Finally, there was Jean Mobius Giraud, the French comic artist who summons up more excitement in one panel than most artists can create in an entire book. He contributed the original costume designs. But still, the weight of the entire work fell upon the drawing board of H.R. Giger. Designing the creature was difficult, Scott admits, but getting the design from paper to the actual thing was the worst thing. The form and texture had to be right. It had to be light enough for an actor to move freely within it. It had to be bizarre, yet practical. Every process was difficult, Scott repeated, and to keep it within its budget was even more difficult, especially since the alien first required sketches and then scale models before the construction company took over. It was at this point that Carlo Rambaldi entered the scene. The Carlo Rambaldi who built King Kong, but redeemed himself with the extraterrestrials of Close Encounters. And now, the mastermind behind the alien's mouth. Since Rambaldi's education centered on industrial design, he is an eminently practical man. And so enamored of the project was he that the technician took 4 weeks off from his other pressing engagements to work wonders with H.R. Giger's monster. He designed the mechanics of the head, made the lips work, made the jaws function, Scott professes. Normally you can't stand to have the camera take a close look at things like this, but it was so good I just did a huge close-up on it. Here were gigantic jaws that rivaled those of Bruce, the Jaws Shark, and Richard Moonraker Keel. Here was a trio of jaws that launched 1,000 heart skips. However, while the subject matter of Alien was frenetic, the shooting had settled into a comfortable panic. Every day Ridley Scott would unleash his special brand of incense on the set to give the film a diffused look, while the cast and crew tried to adjust to the day's pressing schedule. Their adjustments included avoiding more than just the rampaging alien. They had to survive the rampaging technicians as well, for even the very first sequence, when the astronauts are rudely awakened from their hypersleep, involved 500 and even 1,000 watt spotlights under their cabin seats. The actors had to climb over these lamps, Van Lint laughs, and at times their knees got very, very warm. There was more and more lighting magic as each scene progressed. For the sequence involving the eggs in the hold of the derelict craft, the crew used an actual laser light to create the ovoid's blue shield. We took the camera up and down through the laser beam, Van Lint remembers. It was great fun, but the scene was shot right near the end of the schedule. Time was short. Things were coming to a head very quickly, and since it was the alien's head to which they were coming, the technical crew was called on to produce even faster, more resourceful work. For the film's final sequence, poor Ripley trying to escape in the shuttlecraft, director Scott and cinematographer Van Lint threw out all the stops. If I remember correctly, the director of photography states, I was using 4 ordinary strobe flashlights to film the alien escape craft sequence. I thought it looked very, very good when the creature climbed out of the wall, but it was a bit difficult to work in because people ended up getting dizzy after a while. I remember when we were setting the scene up, we'd have to switch them off because people couldn't stand up. Production designer Seymour remembers that last scene for entirely different reasons. We finally introduced this patient, 7-foot man wearing the extraordinary alien costume, you see. We introduced him into a section of the set, found a space for him, and literally built the equipment around him so that he became part of the texture of the wall. So it was only in this final scene that the entire alien, a huge, bony, 8-foot angry demon, was seen in all its awful fury. Originally, the creature was scripted to appear on screen throughout the film, causing all sorts of rampaging damage. But once work got underway, the technical team came to a secure decision. The great problem, continues Seymour, with creating monsters is that you must never allow the audience to see them for any more than 8 frames, however technically marvelous they may be. In the end, they will give themselves away, and the scary monster becomes a man in a rubber suit. So the trick is to never show the thing as a complete entity until the very last possible minute. And, at the last possible minute, the creature is glimpsed, then done away with, in as spectacular a fashion as its deadly counterpart in Jaws. It is a frighteningly cold, fiery finish for the multi-fanged fiend, an end totally fitting for the marauding murderer. And once the executives at 20th Century Fox saw the complete work, they knew they had something incredible on their hands. We had to keep showing rough cuts of the picture during the filming, says Scott, leaving huge gaps here and there for special effects shots and miniatures. Then, 8 days after the end of shooting, we were able to show Fox a 2-hour and 22-minute cut. Of course, long before that stage, the people at the studio had got wind of the fact that we were working on something special. I think it had really grown in their estimation from the original $4.5 million film they had originally planned. Indeed it was. Alien opened as planned on May 25th, taking the world by storm. Even the cast and crew were surprised at the incredible reaction their film elicited. They had scared themselves making the movie, then unleashed it on the waiting world while hoping for the best. The best is what both we, the audience, and they, the filmmakers, got. Alien is out of this world. 4 days after its premiere, Alien had already grossed over $3.5 million, though it was showing at only 100 theaters across the country. Yet even with the movie in release, the ongoing tinkering did not stop. Despite the success of Star Wars, 20th Century Fox geared up for a massive publicity and merchandising campaign, one which could not afford controversy, such as... Up until the very last minute, for instance, Dan O'Bannon and Ron Cobb, who could rightfully be called the Alien's pa and godfather, weren't even sure they would get on-screen credit. The sticky situation arose during the rewrite process, where producers Hill and Giler adapted O'Bannon's rough original into a polished, marketable manuscript. The names of O'Bannon's original characters were changed to protect the confused. Females were introduced into what was once an all-male cast. Not much was changed beyond recognition, contends O'Bannon. About 75% of what I wrote is still there, but a great many things were textured differently. Luckily, the weeks of ongoing arbitration between producers and the Writers Guild had a happy ending when O'Bannon's name appeared on the screen during its first public performance. His relief was shared in part by all the artists and crew of Alien, for neither did their contributions go unrecognized. In making a film like Alien, director Scott explains, there is a large group of individuals who tend to get overlooked. The art department is a prime example. Their budget alone approached $2 million. The challenge of taking the visual concept and building sets which will work on film was extremely well done. They were actually constructing reality, and the reality was a powerful and gory one. So gory that, for a bit, the executives at 20th Century Fox worried whether the nation's young fans would get to see the cold-blooded classic. But the production team stood firm. Although bits and pieces of scenes were excised, the film's integrity remained intact. There was fright aplenty and gore galore. The studio had a lot of guts, in more ways than one. Even now, they continue to mobilize to get an Alien into every house in the country. T-shirts, playsets, even the incredible 15-inch posable Alien doll are ready to attack your playrooms. Truly, it is the age of Alien. Note, see page 61 for word on Alien 2. Senior writer for Warren, Richard Myers, provides his own review for the film, which of course is a glowing one, as if a review included in an official movie magazine could be anything but. It is important to remember, though, which Myers brings up quite a bit, a lot of critics at the time weren't all that generous with the film. Many well-known critics dismissed the film initially, and it wasn't necessarily received as the instant classic it was in hindsight. But of course, fans in 1979 knew better, as did Richard Myers. Here's his review. Brilliant. 1. Shining brightly. 2. Distinguished or illustrious. 3. Having great intelligence or talent. Brilliant is an adjective greatly overused, but if one is to believe the Random House Dictionary's definition, the description fits Alien perfectly. Rarely, if ever, has a monster movie been handled so sharply. Hardly has a science fiction film been produced which paid such heed to characterization and plot construction. And not since Frankenstein has a horror movie been so filled with detail, humanity, and morality. Morality? Yes, morality. Seeing Alien, the first question viewers might ask themselves, once they get over the initial numbing experience of the film, is why were these people killed? Because the alien was all-powerful? Because they were stupid? Because the script said so? There may be bits of truth in each of these opinions, but the one overwhelming reason the majority of the cast died was because they cared for each other. If the crew did not have such affection for each other, Kane would not have been brought back on the ship in the first place, and Parker would have torched the monster when he had a clear shot at it near the finale. He didn't because Lambert was in the way. The affection the crew members had for each other was obvious. They bantered, cursed, and teased, but when it counted, they gave up their lives for each other. There haven't been many movies in the monster-on-the-loose genre. Alien has most often been compared to The Thing, It, The Terror from Beyond Space, and Planet of the Vampires. And the film has suffered from these comparisons. Many critics chose to condemn Alien as derivative of these other movies. What they seem to forget is that even the classic The Thing, as bold as it was far from original. The plots of films do not spring newly born from producers' imaginations either. Rather than accuse Alien of plagiarism or lifting ideas, the epic film should be viewed as the latest in a long line of related features. And to this point, Alien is far and beyond the best of this genre. Another accusation which short-sighted reviewers have leveled against the production is its so-called bloodthirstiness. Some say it's too gory. Some say it's just a shock movie, concerned more with cheap scares than with honest horror. These critics may have slipped into a screening of Prophecy by mistake, since their attitudes are unrealistic in the face of what actually happens on screen during Alien. One thing about the movie, it plays scrupulously fair with the audience. There is hardly a cheap thrill in the film. The only time the movie reaches for a boo-type shock are in scenes featuring Jones, the cat. Every other incidence of the alien's appearance is telegraphed by many seconds. Never does the director have the alien pop up unexpectedly. Any director can have a monster break down a door. Ridley Scott strove for something far less tangible than a freak show. Some examples. Before the facehugger first appears, its egg turns transparent. The coiled thing undulates in its shell. The top slowly opens. The gooey hunk vibrates for a second, and Kane looks in. When the facehugger's corpse drops upon Ripley's shoulder, it is dead and unthreatening. Before the chestburster makes its spectacular entrance, there are many moments of frenzied shock when Kane writhes in unbearable pain. Then, to further prepare the audience, a swath of red appears on his shirt before the worst happens. A surprise? Only if you'd been off at the candy counter. As Brett tries to attract the cat, the alien slowly uncoils behind him. Brett turns and stares for many moments before his fate is sealed. Dallas enters the tunnels with the full knowledge that the alien is within, and even though the monster appears suddenly to him, the audience has been busy sharing Lambert's point of view. She has been screaming of its approach long enough to rouse the 45th Panzer Division. Lambert and Parker's own deaths only occur after the camera has recorded the girl's terrified expression. She sees the alien, and we see that she sees the alien, long before the camera turns to it. In almost every case, the characters' deaths are nearly bloodless. Except for Kane, the murders are handled with miraculous taste considering the circumstances. The cutting is precise, usually switching to the next scene immediately after the alien's lightning-fast tongue can be heard bursting from its mouth, but before it actually strikes. Beyond the chestburster, what many squeamish patrons are really remembering in discomfort and disgust are the many moments that an entrance was prepared for the alien. The monster didn't show. Brett's search for the cat is a perfect example of this suspense-laden technique. Naturally, every other cat chase lessens in its effectiveness, but to stick with the cat as the only red herring is admirable, considering all the unfair shocks the film crew could have dropped in the lap of the audience. The ending of the film has also fallen under unjust criticism. The scene in question occurs shortly after Ripley's ultimate homage to her fellow crew, the destruction of the entire Nostromo. Many of the more logically minded among the viewers have suggested that it would have made more sense to leave the ship be, inform the authorities of its location, let them handle the beast, and pocket the entire reward for the ore collected. Given the humanity the film has already displayed, this concept must be dismissed as ludicrous. The alien murdered Ripley's friends. It was an incredible threat to humans. Leave it be? Discussing the crew's action overall, another complaint is invariably voiced by critics. Why were they all so stupid? No astronaut worth his or her salt would be so glib, casual, and generally slap-happy with an extraterrestrial on board. Well, unlike many movies of its type, Alien attempts to give method to the crew's seeming madness. What must be remembered is that these 7 people are not highly trained exploratory astronauts. They are mineral mercenaries, little more than interplanetary truckers. Furthermore, several times mention is made of an alien council or committee back on Earth. Indeed, alien discovery is deemed by the Nostromo's computers as a primary function of the ship. The implication is that other alien life forms had already been discovered and analyzed, without the hazards represented by this one. Finally, the crew's relatively calm reaction to the monster's presence can be attributed to one other factor. It isn't until late in the film that the awful potential of the full-grown beast is discovered. Apart from these plot considerations, the aesthetics of the film presented the actors and Alien with a task that is Herculean. Within the tried-and-true gimmicks of the genre, they had to be real people. They had to infuse with pathos and sympathy what could have been meaningless ciphers. It is to their credit that there is not one cut-out hero or goofy comic relief. Tom Skerritt's Dallas is a tired, intrepid captain who discovers, with painful resignation, that he is way out of his league. His scene in the computer room, where he asks about his chances and the computer plays dumb, is of vital importance to his characterization and the power of the pitcher. Sigourney Weaver's Ripley, considering that it is her first screen role, makes for an auspicious debut. She manages to be strong without losing her femininity or her passion. The scene where she confronts Ash in the computer room is a high watermark during her performance. Speaking of Ash, Ian Holmes' performance is precisely brittle. All the clues to his non-humanity can be seen with greater clarity upon a second viewing, but they were there all along. Even when not subtly proclaiming his non-human origins, he brings a quiet intensity to every scene in which he's involved. His fellow Britisher John Hurt is suitably tight, as befits his range of successful characterizations. One has only to watch his flighty portrayal of Caligula in I, Claudius, repeated in August at the height of Alien's run, to marvel at his abilities as the intense Cain. Different though these characters are, in both cases he looks as though he was typecast. Even though her more interesting scenes were pared down in the final version of the film, Veronica Cartwright manages to transform terror into an emotion comparable with love and hate. Although she borders on red-faced hysteria much of the time she is on screen, she holds it comparatively in check, considering the outlandish circumstances. Harry Dean Stanton is nothing short of incredible. As mentioned in the cast and credits section, he has a miraculous ability to appear completely at home in every movie he makes. He even remembers that Marlon Brando thought he was an area bozo brought in as an extra on the set of Missouri Breaks. This, after almost 2 decades of incredibly natural portrayals. His easygoing Brett is no less an accomplishment. Yaphet Kottos Parker is the Rock of Gibraltar. Throughout the film, he serves as a vessel of hate, anger, hope, despair, determination, and compassion. Although initially he seems totally at odds with everyone but Brett, his full range of emotions really start to boil after his friend's death. Kotto's energy is tightly directed and nearly incomparable. Another contributor to Alien is almost more versatile than any of the actors. Most movie makers are quick to note how important music is to the overall effect of a film, but Jerry Goldsmith's abilities have too long gone unrecognized. Just listen to his score for Alien, then put on his soundtrack albums for Patton, Chinatown, Planet of the Apes, The Omen, Our Man Flint, The Great Train Robbery, The Wind and the Lion, or any other of his scores to see just how versatile he is. Versatility is also a watchword for the special effects crew. The visuals range from sweeping shots of majestic spaceships in flight, which have become mundane through the overexposure for some viewers, but remain thrilling to many, to the absurdly simple but effective use of holes in the floor. Their amazing additions to Alien make the experience fun for those who have grown weary of sci-fi films. When Ash's robot head comes alive again, very few are unaware of the human head-through-a-panel technique in use, but marvel at the audacity of something so easy working so well. The special effects are further enhanced by the sets, marvelously evoked by designers Ron Cobb and H.R. Giger and given depth by production designer Michael Seymour and art directors Roger Christian and Les Dilley. The sets are combinations of economy and complexity, filling the screen without looking busy. But the highest marks of all firmly belong to director Ridley Scott. Every frame of film is a tribute to his artistry. Throughout the movie, evidence of his genius builds to an open and shut case. His handling of mood, his control of the visuals, his use of light, texture, and close-up, not to mention the players, all are riveting. Consider just a few of his most memorable and diverse achievements. The smoothly edited awakening of the astronauts from hypersleep, the evocative first meal, where the crew's dialogue overlaps, but in so doing helps their characters to surface. Ripley and Ash's battle, as a drop of crimson appears beneath the girl's nose, a drop of white drools across his forehead. Ripley's frenzied exodus from the Nostromo, with its incredible close-ups of her sweat-beaded hand and face. It was also the director's choice to cut Alien to its fast-moving final form. In order to do so, he had to eliminate some dialogue. The negative aspect, several explanations for on-screen action ended up on the cutting room floor. The plus, the audience wound up knowing as much as the Nostromo crew. We shared the adventure with them, not ahead of them. Further, it was Scott who decided to eliminate the most adverse aspect of the final shooting script, the original downbeat ending. Many films kind of mindlessly pander to humanity's bloodlust and heap the gore upon characters who tend to be as realistic as cardboard. Even when the production values are good in films of this nature, like The Omen and 1979's Dracula, the tendency is to end with evil triumphant. Initially, Alien was equipped with just such an ending, with the death of the alien but the survival on the shuttle of one of its eggs. It was Scott who made sure the film ended with Sigourney Weaver's expression radiating quiet peace, while Jerry Goldsmith's score fades from one of omen to a tranquil end-suite. Throughout the enthusiasm, consideration, experience, and, here's that word again, brilliance of Scott and his staff, Alien remains a miraculous accomplishment in the science fiction form. Hopefully, it will be but the first maturing step in a genre where story and people should be more important than gimmicks. And there we have it, a glowing or brilliant review from an early admirer of Alien and all it had to offer. One section worthy of note that I want to point out is the attention given to the scene where Dallas asks Mother about his chances against the alien. Myers highlights this as an integral scene to the Dallas character and the film as a whole, yet you may recall was actually removed from the 2003 director's cut. Little cuts in the new version were made here and there to give it a more modern pace, but this is the one omission that really perplexes me, because I do very much agree with the reviewer on it. And it just seems like such an arbitrary cut, too. I can't really understand or justify why it was excluded. I hope that if Scott decides to revisit Alien once again, which wouldn't be unheard of since he's recut Blade Runner more than once, that this scene will be returned to where it belongs and where it is very much needed. Moving on, at this point in the magazine, we stray from behind the scenes to a more imaginative consideration of the mysteries that lie within. The big question audiences were left with back in 1979, and still today really, is what is that space jockey? What's its story? Where did it come from? In this piece, The Space Jockey's Tale, the author offers some speculation. While there are references to earlier concepts from the script, it should be noted that this is not an official proclamation of the origin of the jockey. This is more just an idea of what could have happened and how it could have gotten to where we see it in the film. This is The Space Jockey's Tale. A deserted, bone-like spacecraft of staggering size. A trio of thick-lipped organic openings in the side of the U-shaped derelict. Within, a chamber whose walls are reminiscent of a human ribcage, whose air is permeated by a thin blue mist. In its center, a great disk, a cannon-like device, and the fossilized remains of a giant, long-dead pilot, the space jockey. The being's radio is still functioning, still transmitting a final, frightening message to the universe. Stay away. The space jockey. Who is he? Or is it a she? Or a biomechanical part of the craft in which it was traveling? Where did it come from? And why? To conquer, colonize, or simply to visit? Why are there hundreds of alien eggs in the hold of its spaceship? In the original draft of the Alien plot, the jockey was not from space, but from the very same world as the alien, one of the small planet's 3 civilizations. And the vehicle was not a spaceship, but a land craft moving from one sector of the planetoid to another. Then the concept changed. The jockey came from outer space. Its mission? Unknown. Its fate? Killed by the chestburster. Its legacy? A faint etching of a triangle on its instrument panel, a silent alarm to anyone who might happen along. A warning not to go near the huge pyramid which stands on the horizon. For within inside the pyramid is death, in the form of thousands of unborn aliens. But budget cuts forced a simplification of that second storyline, eliminating the pyramid, along with its hieroglyphics showing the aliens' reproductive cycle and an altar housing the lethal eggs. So, a third plot was conceived, one in which Lambert, Dallas, and Kane follow the spacecraft radio's insistent signal and find the jockey in the seat behind the cannon. There is no hint as to what happened before the jockey was slain by an alien. The derelict does not appear to have crash-landed, nor could it have been a scientific expedition, since there isn't an abundance of equipment such an operation would have required. However, using the facts at our disposal and some reasonable speculation, we can construct a likely scenario. Thousands of years ago, the jockey's race had hoped to settle on the aliens' barren world. Like most advanced civilizations, they had long ago outgrown their native world. A large, fit breed, they planned to use their sophisticated science to do what they had done on countless other planets, alter its environment and make it habitable. First, the colonists made certain they would not be destroying any native life forms with their atmospheric manipulation. Unfortunately, since the alien eggs were dormant, the sensors of the benign giants indicated no signs of life. A ship landed, its crew hopeful that the job could be swiftly accomplished. They began their work, and after screaming into their radios, were never heard from again. A second team suffered a similar fate, so the third landing was made by the jockey at the controls of an armed vessel. With one finger on the trigger of the cannon, the pilot warrior looked for the creatures which were presumed to have slain the previous parties. There was nothing to be seen. No remains of the jockey's fellow beings or their attackers. Stepping onto the planet's rocky surface, the jockey did some exploring and, like those before him, discovered the alien eggs. Thinking them to be harmless in their unhatched state and possibly damaged by the environmental changes begun by his predecessors, the newcomer loaded them into the ship's hold to bring them home for protection and study. The parents of these creatures must have perished, protecting their unborn children against what they thought was an invasion. Surely they could not be blamed for that. Suddenly, about to leave the hold, the jockey was assaulted by a facehugger and, unable to see, stumbled to the bridge of the ship, to surroundings which were familiar and could be navigated by touch alone. When the facehugger's task had been completed, the alien seed implanted in a host, the chitinous carrier died and fell away. The unsuspecting victim recovered quickly and broadcast the story home. Then the jockey felt the first painful movements of the throbbing chestburster. Moments before the alien sprung from within its torso, the giant being programmed the ship to beam a warning, twice each minute, to any ship which might approach the planetoid. Stay away. Perhaps sometime in the distant future, extraterrestrial beings will find the deserted Nostromo, floating through space, and try to piece together stories such as we have. One thing is certain, no matter how fantastic the narrative, the truth will always be stranger. Maybe not the worst explanation, but I'm a little perplexed by that last part where the Nostromo is referenced, seeing as how it was destroyed. But maybe the author was actually referring to the Narcissus. I'm not too sure. But what you may notice about this article and some others to follow is that there's a presumption that LV-426 is the homeworld of the alien. This is not the case, or at least very likely not the case, and the exact origin of the alien has yet to be seen. While this explanation doesn't really mesh at all with what Ridley Scott has presented in his prequels, it does feel close enough to the little bit of history of the jockeys we got from the Aliens comics, in which were portrayed as more explorers rather than, well, engineers. We get back to behind the scenes with some juicy details that viewers may not have been privy to, including one much talked about omitted scene with alien secrets. A motion picture is filled with magic. It is also filled with intrigue, confusion, frustration, omission, and impatience. Alien, like many of its cinematic counterparts, was no exception. Within its making are many untold stories of what was and what might have been. But unlike many other movies, the stories that filter from backstage on Alien are incredible, shocking, monumental. Most of these stories tell of changes which would have altered the form of the finished film completely. They tell of fascinating techniques created on the spur of the moment which did much to heighten the film's frightening effect. Here they are then, the secrets of Alien. Fact. The original Dan O'Bannon script called for 3 distinctly different alien forms to be found on the planetoid of the derelict. And as initially conceived, the alien was to be a sexually driven creature, a monster only by the fact that its biological purpose for existence is to procreate. Its only fault is the ignorance of the frailties of the human form. Fact. In the reworked O'Bannon script by Walter Hill and David Giler, the female characters were integrated so deeply that a romantic subplot was introduced between Dallas and Ripley. A subplot that was set to culminate in a love scene inside an observation blister, a love scene which would be interrupted by the floating corpse of the chest-bursted Kane. Fact. Ridley Scott's love of Joseph Conrad's literary works dictated a change in titles. Originally, the space tug was named the Leviathan, while its escape ship's moniker was the Snark. In an obvious homage to one of his primary influences, Scott had the ships renamed to Nostromo from a Conrad novel of the same title and Narcissus from another Conrad work. Fact. Given that 20th Century Fox imposed such a tight deadline on filming, the technical crew had precious little time to prepare for filming. Indeed, Bill Welch, the construction manager, pleaded for the picture to be delayed for 2 weeks while his crew tried to meet the schedule. But the date had been set, and the shooting began on time, even though the sets were not finished. While Scott shot one angle, often the crew would be feverishly working to finish the other. Fact: Ridley Scott is a master filmmaker who can only feel fully secure directing from behind a camera. Throughout the filming of Alien, 2 cameras were always in use. One was handled by Scott himself, and the other by director of photography Derek Van Lint. There were constant problems keeping the 2 cameras out of each other's way. The only time complicated sightlines did not have to be doubly worked out was when a handheld shot was required. At that point, Scott was the only camera person, since he was an expert at running backwards. Fact: The space jockey, that beautifully detailed fossil sitting in its decaying ship, had to be seen from several different directions during the course of the action. Building such a large creature was expensive enough, so building an entire enclosure representing the chamber of the derelict was definitely prohibitive. The answer came from more of Michael Seymour's clever designs. Only one small section of the wall was built, but the jockey itself was constructed upon a turntable, a huge, lazy Susan. So, instead of the actors moving about on set, the space jockey moved about them. Fact: The alien itself was not entirely the work of H.R. Giger. Though the visual look is his, Ridley Scott got his inspiration for the final form of the monster from Giger's paintings. Its evolution was a matter of committee. First, it was agreed that the alien should mature 3 times. Next, the facehugger was reduced from a big bird-like beast with claws to the crab-like creation seen in the film. Then, after the chestburster sheds its skin, the final monstrosity is so unlike anything seen before, the only nickname the crew could think of attaching to it was the Little Rascal. Fact: The scene in the hold of the derelict ship called for more than its fair share of devilish special effects work. The moment when the facehugger first comes leaping from its egg onto Kane's helmet will long be remembered by audiences, but the actual filming of the scene will long be remembered by actor John Hurt for entirely different reasons. While the on-screen demon seemed to be a combination of an octopus, slug, and crab, what was actually hurled at Hurt was a model whose underbelly was made of 3 pounds of liver and a sheep's stomach. Fact: Another unforgettable scene is when the chestburster comes ripping from Kane's chest, and if some critics felt that sequence was too strong for audiences, how'd they think the cast and crew felt? For them, even though they'd been prepared, it was actually happening. Derek Van Lint, the cinematographer, remembers that filming the entire scene was no great problem, but it was a different story when he saw his own film in the screening room. The first time we shot it, we showed some pretty hairy things, he remembers. It was the only time I had ever had to walk out of the rushes. I went out and was rather ill, and I was ribbed quite a bit about that for the rest of the picture. Fact: There was much more to the alien than met the eye. Since Ridley Scott used a painting by Giger as the basis for the adult alien, he had to work backward to create the first 2 phases. During this process, the director came to understand the organism completely. The nasty one, he says. The thing that sprung out of the egg, the preambulatory penis, as we used to call it, is the father. All it does is plant the seed. And the next generation takes on the characteristics of whatever form it landed on. This means that the alien may not always be a biped. It could conceivably be a combination of the original facehugger and whatever host it uses. Fact: Every phase of the alien's growth is shown on screen except for the final stage. Once the monster is fully developed, the film does not elaborate on how the initial egg was created. However, while it was not shown in movie houses, such an explanatory scene was filmed. It showed Ripley, running from the corpses of Lambert and Parker, coming upon a pair of huddled masses on sea level. Upon closer examination, these 2 things turn out to be the bodies of Dallas and Brett. Each is bound tightly to the walls by a gooey metallic cocoon, and each is being used as food for the beginnings of a new race of aliens. Brett is too far gone, but Dallas manages to open his eyes and plead for execution. Ripley, horrified but determined, grants the captain's last painful wish. The scene was suitably powerful, but the director felt that it slowed the momentum of the fast-moving finale. So the decision was made to excise it from the finished film. It was too late, however, to keep the scene from appearing in the paperback novelization of the story. Fact: When the nearly completed alien was first shown to executives, artists, visitors, and guests, the reaction was anything but professional. According to an eyewitness, one person choked on his drink while watching, another knocked over a tray when he leaped up in surprise, and many other filmmakers were seen covering their eyes in panic. The premiere showing to the public was a little bit different. The screams, shouts, and jumps came at regular, perfectly timed intervals. Ridley Scott and company accomplished what they intended to do: scare the world out of its wits. One of the most interesting articles within this magazine is actually devoted to the alien itself, taking a careful look at the biology of the xenomorph. It looks at the practicality behind its horrifying design, comparing it to real-life creatures, and it boldly asks, could the alien really exist? It's a survivor. As the robotic science officer Ash describes it, a perfect organism. It is a huge parasite which can draw nourishment from any life form, human or non-human, which is powerful enough to tear people limb from limb almost without effort, which can breathe regardless of the composition of the atmosphere, which has guile and is immune to even the harshest environments known to science. A survivor. Science fiction films rarely delve into the physiological whys and wherefores of its leading monsters. There's a good reason for this. Most its and things seen on screen are designed for the visual impact rather than biological credibility. The producers are looking to sell tickets, not win the Nobel Prize for biology. Yet, we know that our universe is teeming with stars, and that many of these are suns possessing planetary families. A good number of these worlds support life forms which will seem to us bizarre in shape and size. Might a team of astronauts one day encounter a creature like the alien? A deadly, vicious, apparently heartless beast? A creature whose sole purpose is to feed and reproduce? Could such a monster possibly exist? The answer is yes. Consider terrestrial insects. They hatch from eggs. They live only to serve the nest. Their lives consist of eating, fighting, and breeding. Change their biology slightly, increase their size, and you have our alien. The mouth and tail. It's a fact of evolution that any physical structure which a creature can do without is dropped. Nothing personal. Nature is simply a very practical force. We must presume, therefore, that every spine, scale, and lump on the body of the alien serves a purpose. Let's look first at the tail. Although the tail might be useful to the creature as a third hand, a powerful tentacle of sorts, it probably serves a more vital function. Besides, if it were a hand, the alien would have used it to check its forced exit from the shuttle at the end of the picture. Since the alien is not an arboreal entity, does not hang from a tree like a monkey, and since the tail is not used as a counterweight when it walks to offset the enormous weight of its head, it can only be a tool of communication. Whether through sign language, the tail is thin enough to be twisted and twined into a wide variety of words and letters, or sonic vibrations, it is clearly the way the alien communicates with members of its own kind. That's why the tail is limp throughout the film. There's no one to talk to. Further evidence for the tail as a method of communication comes from the fact that the mouth could never be used to this end. The alien has neither lips nor a flat tongue to form vowels and consonants. Like the mouth of a shark, the mouth of the alien is simply an eating center. The fact that the alien has no external ears is further evidence that it must communicate by sight rather than sound. We mentioned the mouth, and this is probably the most fascinating aspect of the alien's physiology. For one thing, it's very, very heavy. With 3 sets of extendable teeth and a grisly tongue, the amount of musculature required to work these structures is enormous. It is all housed in the elongated cranium of the alien, which also serves another purpose. It helps the alien hold its head erect. Because it is so front-heavy, the monster's jaws and face would droop against its chest if it hadn't the extended skull to serve as a counterbalance. Without this counterweight, the alien's neck would have to be over 3 times as thick as it is to store the muscles needed to hold the head aloft. It would also need a massive central spine to which the muscles could be attached, a purpose served by the bone of lengthened cranium. It would also need a massive central spine to which the muscles could be attached, a purpose served by the bone of the lengthened cranium. Speaking of the neck, even without the musculature and bone described above, it is still comparatively thin. This is because, with all those grinding and tearing teeth, the food it eats must be as thin as straw, the rest of the neck consisting of skeletal structure which anchors the head to the body. The legs and back. The fact that the alien is bipedal, that is, walks on 2 legs, tells us a great deal about it. To balance on a pair of legs against a comparatively tricky center of gravity calls for a sophisticated neural system, a nerve network which can evolve only after the more primitive 4-legged walk has been mastered and discarded. To walk as a quadruped, like a dog or a lion, requires mechanical coordination. However, the brain power needed to move from 4 legs to 2, with 2 of those legs becoming arms, which terminate in complex hands, is considerably more. Thus, the two-legged, two-armed alien is rather advanced along the evolutionary scale. A two-legged creature is one which is on the road to cultural achievement. It has hands to wield tools or a paintbrush. It can build or create art. Since the alien was found in a cave-like setting, unadorned with the trappings of civilization, we can deduce that it is early in its Stone Age. This notion is supported by the fact that it lives only for the moment, killing its human companions without considering who will pilot the ship if they're all dead. The alien doesn't know about computers. If it did, it would have them. These are the acts of a barbarian, not a civilized being. Further, like a cave dweller of prehistoric Earth, the alien does not try to communicate with its hosts/foes. It seeks only to survive. Tens of thousands of years from the era of the film, when the race is as far from the alien seen on screen as we are from our own apish ancestors, it will be physically and intellectually superior to most any possible life form. Only war among its own kind could possibly destroy it. One of the most curious features of the alien are the huge protuberances on its back. You will notice that there are two different styles, a flat one on top and two rows of conical projections below. They serve two entirely different purposes. The lower spines are defensive. If attacked from behind, the creature is protected. No predator will find it easy to slip between the bones to lunch on the softer flesh in which they are anchored. Even were alien to assault alien, it might well splinter its jaws trying to broach these treacherous reefs. The projection on top of these, just below the neck, serves a far more unique end. It is a weather vane. The alien's planet is one of a hostile environment. Though the beast is tough-skinned and well-suited to survive such a harsh world, it prefers, like any living organism, to venture forth for food when the weather is at its least belligerent. The projection, with tiny antennae along its top, senses improving or worsening environmental conditions, a drop in wind speed, a rise in humidity, a fall in temperature. It also helps the alien to see behind it. Since the beast can't turn its head with ease, remember, it's heavy and, besides, will smack into the hoop bones on its shoulders. More on these in a moment. The weather vane might also sense the approach of a predator or another alien. We mentioned the hoops on the shoulders. Unless these are filters which purify air going to or from the lungs, they may simply distinguish male from female aliens. If our alien is female, it may be a structure which helps her carry eggs. If male, the hoops may be ornamental, or like the horns of many terrestrial animals such as elk, used in butting matches to determine the leader of a herd or tribe. Eggs and energy. In an earth creature, egg-laying is almost always equivalent with cold-bloodedness, that is, animals which rely on external temperatures to maintain their body heat. This is surely not the case with the alien, whose world is bitterly cold. Since heat is related to a creature's energy output, and since the alien is clearly quite energetic, it must be warm-blooded. In earth animals, this implies insulation in the form of blubber, fur, hair, or feathers. The alien can only have one of these, blubber, and that in short supply. It is not, you will note, a bulky animal. Thus, we can guess that warmth is somehow spread throughout the alien's limbs by the many external rivulets and bumps which cover its body. This would also explain the monster's ferocious appetite. To keep up high energy levels, alien must consume a great deal of fuel. In other words, food. Human food. Turning this food into energy is another matter. It is a process which requires air, oxygen in humans, and the question of what the alien breathes is a perplexing one. The atmosphere of the creature's world is heavy with carbon dioxide, the gaseous staple of plants. This would imply that the alien thrives on some form of plant-like photosynthesis. However, this is a hasty conclusion, for the alien can also survive in an oxygen-heavy human environment. There is only one possible solution. The creature's internal organs and metabolism are equipped to function in a wide variety of atmospheres. Like terrestrial generators, which can be made to run on water, nuclear power, steam, coal, or oil, the alien has a complex system of fluids and tissue which can switch to many different forms of respiration. In passing, one might wonder why the aliens are a race of egg layers. The answer no doubt lies in the fact that if the alien were born live, like a human baby, the size of its head would tear the mother to pieces. While the head could conceivably lie flat, with its cranium nestled between the protruding spines on its back, the rigors of birth might be more than the infant's frail neck can bear. Eggs also eliminate the difficulty of feeding young aliens, a prospect we'll examine in a moment. The eyes. Though the alien appears to not have eyes, this is an illusion. Eyes or a similar sensory organ must be located amidst the bulges and tendrils of the face. They are necessary to navigate and spot prey. The weather vane would be insufficient to feel the vibrations of a being in front of the alien. The monster's body would prevent these rippling waves of air from reaching the sensor. Of course, the chances of a creature approaching the alien from the front are remote. No one or no thing would want to face those awesome jaws. For this reason, the alien's eyes are set in the side of its head. It does not allow for stereo vision, but it does cover a broad swath to the creature's left and right. As for the sensitivity of these eyes, they must have to be very acute. Not only does the alien spot foes in the dark corridors of the Nostromo, it must be able to see on the overcast, dusty world it calls home. The presence of a cat on board the Nostromo offers a hint as to the nature of the alien's acuity. Like the alien, the cat is a survivor, a stalker in the dark. The eyes of the two creatures must be quite similar. Far more sensitive than the human organ of vision, the eyes of a cat possess a reflective backing which gives the retina a second stab at picking up any light it may have missed at first. The human eye has a backing which absorbs rather than reflects light. However, to the detriment of the cat/alien, this special backing makes it impossible for the eye to focus sharply, which would account for the alien's broad movements and gestures. Birth and death. The genesis of an individual alien is well documented in the film. One alien lays dozens, perhaps hundreds of eggs. Within each egg is a spore, a seed, housed inside a comparatively large exoskeleton. This structure, affectionately called the facehugger by the producers, is responsible for latching onto a host, Cain in the film, and planting the seed within its body. After a few days, the worm-like newborn explodes from its carrier and proceeds to fend for itself. The host is destroyed. Yet one question which is not explicitly resolved in the film is the lifespan of the alien. In this matter, we shall give trust to the word of Ridley Scott, director of Alien, who describes the creature's life as limited, a cycle of only days. To the casual viewer of the film, it may seem curious that the facehugger chose to exit itself the exact moment Cain appeared. Actually, this is a very calculated maneuver. Because the alien has such a hearty appetite, its kind comes forth only when there is evidence of plentiful food supplies, such as the arrival of the crew of the Nostromo. Were they to hunger or turn on one another in either case, they would fast become extinct. One must speculate, therefore, that the soft tissue of the belly of the facehugger is like the weather vane of the adult alien, extremely sensitive to the presence of an intruder. The rest of the time, the facehuggers lay dormant in their sturdy shells. Clearly, then, the alien can exist, and quite possibly does, in the fair, uncharted depths of space. In fact, a cavern of eggs may be lying on some distant world at this very moment, waiting for you. Finally, the Warren Produced magazine offers some insight to the future of the franchise. The burning question coming out of Alien for fans was, would there be an Alien 2? And what would it be about? Here we get some extremely preliminary details on Alien 2. Not surprisingly, plans are presently underway for a sequel to Alien, one of the most enormously profitable sci-fi blockbusters in film history. As with such follow-up films as the Star Wars sequel, The Empire Strikes Back, and Damien, Omen 2, much of the behind-the-camera talent which made the original film will probably not be involved. Director Ridley Scott has moved on to other projects, such as A Tale of Knights and Wizardry, which will be the subject of his next film. The writers are likewise developing novels and screenplays which will permit them to stretch their talents in other creative directions. Creative people connected with the film believe that 20th Century Fox will come out with a sequel, and here are some of the scenarios which are presently being considered. The alien, merely stunned by its encounter with the shuttle engines, manages to survive outside the craft and reaches civilization along with Ripley. A second expedition to the planetoid is stranded there, and weathering a storm within the derelict and their own ship, its members deal with a group of aliens, climaxed by the appearance of the creatures to whose race the space jockey belongs. A prequel, rather than a sequel, telling the tale of the space jockey and ending where Alien begins, with the arrival of the Nostromo crew. The planetoid of the alien explodes, sending alien eggs to Earth, where, shades of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, a whole flock of monsters runs rampant. All of these scenarios will try to incorporate the character of Ripley, since actress Sigourney Weaver has proven to be the most popular performer in the film. Whatever the final plot of Alien 2, we're sure that when it opens, it will, like the first film, have to be watched from behind the barely spread fingers of your trembling hands. Well, the sequel turned out to be much different than the early concepts presented here, but I think we can all agree the James Cameron film to follow really delivered in ways anticipated by fans of the original, and in entirely unexpected ways. Well worth the wait, which back then must have been agonizing. But until then, a fan could go over this magazine again and again, memorizing all the details, submerging entirely into all things Alien. It's an extremely informative release. A lot of information it reveals is published for the very first time here. I'd consider it quite the monumental piece of Alien fandom reference. The curiosity and hunger for more information still continues to this day. If this channel is a testament to anything, it's that. And it takes a very special movie and very, very special talent behind it to inspire such curiosity and such hunger for information 40 years on. While putting this video together, the news came out of David Giler's passing. He was one of the key figures in bringing Alien to audiences in 1979, and without his contributions, we wouldn't have the movie to be appreciating today. It's a terrible loss. I'm saddened by his passing, and truly appreciate all of his contributions to the series. He worked on them all. He became a creative voice that offered consistency among the franchise, even when different directors and writers came to work on each entry. As a fan of the third film, I especially put value on the fighting he did to shape the story, and in particular the Ripley character, when things were so unclear during production and there wasn't a concrete script to guide the way. It was a daunting trial for all involved, Giler and Hill, Weaver, and Fincher, but what came out of it was a film that people really do still love today, are still discovering, still analyzing just as intently as the first two. And I'd defy anyone to call that a bomb or a failure. Just the opposite. I'd consider it among Giler's greatest successes, creatively. As a fan, as an admirer of his work, I find it especially unfortunate that we may never see his full vision of Alien 5. As reported a few months ago, he and Hill wrote a treatment for Alien 5. I don't know if a full script had been written, but we'll never fully see exactly what he had in mind, whether anything becomes of that treatment or not. Perhaps if it does, if Alien 5 does somehow make its way to being greenlit, Walter Hill could bring it all home. Hill spoke to Variety when the news of Giler's passing broke, and he had this to say: "If you knew David, you knew he was special. The magic of his personality is hard to describe. Funny, angry, extremely knowledgeable, extremely well-read. It was my privilege to write and produce with him, and more importantly, to have his close and deep friendship for nearly 50 years. He will be dearly missed. His legacy from his work on all the films will remain solidly intact, and not to mention the legacy is tributed as the namesake of David, Michael Fassbender's android character from Ridley Scott's prequel films. I've meditated greatly on the description of Giler from this magazine. Ill and bed-stricken, but determined to express himself creatively, eager to work, and developing a work that would begin his career all from a sickbed. That's something I'd never known before reading this. That's very moving and inspiring. I feel I respond to that very strongly, and that makes me believe that truly anything is possible. That's the magic of the movies, though, isn't it? Anything is possible. At least the creatives behind it are very convincing at making us believe so. But I hope you enjoyed this look at the behind-the-scenes magic of the Alien movie magazine. I hope it was an interesting trip back in time, at least for a little while. But here we are, back in 2020. The new year is fast approaching. May it be filled with prosperity, joy, and, most of all, Alien. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like, and you can also subscribe for all the latest videos from the channel. A very, very special thanks goes out to WEYLAND YUTANI executives, EmYarUk, Mark Fox, and in the Ellen Ripley tier of excellence, Lady Anne. My thanks also goes out to the Hive Queens, Ronni, Jensen, Alyssane, and Jackson roesch, all part of the Patreon Hive. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for exclusive posts and contests. In the meantime, you can catch up with Alien Theory over social media. Follow @alien_theory on Twitter and @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.